Welcome back, everybody, to What Really Matters. I'm Tablet Deputy Editor Jeremy Stern with you in Los Angeles. I'm here, as always, with Walter Russell Mead, Tablet news writer, Global View columnist at the Wall Street Journal, and distinguished fellow at Hudson. Let's start with this week's news. First story of the week. In a historic decision, the Supreme Court ruled that former presidents cannot be prosecuted for actions relating to the core powers of their office, and that there is at least a presumption that they have immunity for their official acts more broadly. The decision left open the possibility that the charges brought against former President Donald Trump by special counsel Jack Smith, alleging that Trump conspired to overturn the results of the 2020 election, can still go forward to the extent that the charges are based on his private conduct rather than his official acts. The case now returns to the lower courts for them to determine whether the conduct at the center of the charges against Trump was official or unofficial, an inquiry that, even if it leads to the conclusion that the charges can proceed, will almost certainly further delay any trial in the case. Walter, news or faux news?
Well, it's obviously news. It means that there's zero chance, essentially, that the former president will be on trial before the election. I think there's also a chance that certainly the sentencing in the Manhattan trial has already been delayed, and it is even possible he may be able to challenge the verdict based on some of the findings in that case. I don't, myself, I feel like this is maybe not as much the substance of the decision, the sort of constitutional import is not as large as people are making it out to be. I mean, we're hearing the sort of SEAL Team 6, including from in one of the dissents, that this means the president can do anything. I don't think it does. I'm no lawyer and I'm no Supreme Court justice, but it does look to me as if this does not remove judicial oversight of what presidents might do in certain cases, but it makes it harder. And I have to say, I think I agree with Justice Roberts that in our current political environment, it's a much bigger threat that we're going to have sort of each subsequent president indict the previous presidents. People are so angry. The differences between the parties are so great. And so you just sort of have, we don't want to get into a South Korean situation where it's almost normal that each old president goes to jail at the behest of the new president. And that would, I think, just really not work. And there is less chance, actually, that we're going to see presidents overstepping the bounds. And I would also say you have to look at this decision in context a little bit. People are saying, oh, it's going to make an overmighty executive. And yet just a few days ago, you were hearing from the usual commentators that the Chevron deference decision was gutting the executive and, the courts were taking over everything. I don't think you can see a consistent pattern of either inflating or deflating the executive here. I think something else is at work.
Yeah, on that last point, in a recent episode, we talked about a couple recent Supreme Court decisions where there was actually unanimity or near unanimity when the court was ruling on cases about access to contraceptives, and also a case that was deciding labor relations versus in the Starbucks case. And now it seems we've kind of returned to very controversial Supreme Court decisions, 6-3 in some of the cases. I mean, what's your sense right now of where the court stands as an institution with legitimacy in the eyes of the public? Are we at a kind of low point, high point?
Well, I think, the court is certainly polling lower than it used to. So is the presidency, so is Congress. So I think we have to say the court is not immune to the growing skepticism among Americans about our national institutions, and that's too bad, but it is not necessarily a sign that sort of this court is taking the judicial branch on some kind of a kamikaze cruise. Beyond that, I do think that we are seeing, we're getting these cases that you're talking about, like Chevron, are getting to the heart of the matter, since that there was an era of liberal and progressive jurisprudence, and sort of begins in the New Deal era, and it goes on maybe about 40 or 50 years. And what you had was it's clear that the Constitution that the framers developed was built for a much smaller country and a much less complicated country with many fewer laws and many fewer public questions coming up. And so, as the kind of farmers' republic of the late 18th century first tried to cope with what happens with, enormous population, with struggles like slavery, with all the consequences of the Industrial Revolution, a lot of the judges in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s sort of tried to put some fixes into the original framework of the Constitution. So, okay, well, it seems really hard for Congress to pass as many regulations as we need for the new economy. So fine, we'll set up these regulatory agencies with lifetime appointees or limited term appointees, and let them do it. That was a practical solution to a real problem, but it does over time erode the democratic character of the government. It is not, I think, the right long-term path for the United States. And now what we have is a court majority that's essentially trying to unfix the fixes, to return to the pre-1930s jurisprudence, not in every respect, but in many. And that is, on the one hand, it does shake people's faith in the court, as originally when the Earl Warren Court and some of these others were shaking longstanding constitutional dogma. A lot of people questioned the legitimacy of the court. They're sort of like, well, this is just politics. It's what these 9 judges think, and that's the new law. Then over time, a lot of people just got used to the judicial framework that these people had established. And so now when again you're seeing people trying to hack away at what people had assumed were the foundations of legal order, there is once again this sense of the court as being political and so on. I actually think that what they're doing now is, on the whole, again, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, and I'm not going to agree to every decision that people make, but on the whole and in general, we are moving, I think, back to a sounder basis long term for the institutional life of the American Republic. But as we've talked about before, Jeremy, things are going to have to change to make this work. And a lot of this is that Congress, which in many ways has been the weakest and poorest performing branch of the federal government, is going to have to get its act together. Essence of constitutional government is a strong and effective Congress. We do not have one now, and it's been a long time since we have.
All right, our second story. A dramatic new era began in France on June 30th when Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party took a massive lead in first-round voting for the lower house of parliament. National Rally has never been so close to governing France, despite the determination of the centrist and left-wing parties to keep it out of power. The party secured about 34% of the vote, and support for it increased in 98.6% of France's municipalities since 2017. Ahead of a final runoff vote on July 7th, this puts Le Pen's party on course to win 230 to 280 seats in the 577-seat National Assembly, up from 88, and become easily the biggest group in parliament. A result at the upper end of that range would put the party in touching distance of an overall majority of 289. Walter, news or faux news?
Bit of both. What's faux news here is this was not new. They'd already done very well in the European elections. So in that sense, National Front, they rename themselves, but the Le Pen party maintains its support. That's not as big of a story. And again, they're not going to have a majority. Is 33% of the vote in a 3-way race some kind of huge thumping majority that shakes the universe? No, it isn't. Okay. But there is news in this result, which is that 2 parties that are basically kind of hostile to the status quo, the left coalition, which includes really bad people, and a far-right coalition, which also includes some really bad people, between the 2 of them get about 70%, certainly a 2/3 close to a two-thirds majority, that is bad. That means that the kind of, Rubio France, rules-based international order, is running on fumes. And that also means, because of France's importance in the European Union, that it's going to be less and less likely, whatever happens in the second round of this election, that the European Union is going to be able to go on working the way many of us have just assumed it would work. So yes, something is changing in France, but let's not just say, "Oh my goodness, it's Vichy France, it's Pétain, it's the hard right." First of all, before they could get this result, the Le Pen party had to do a lot of things. For one thing, she even kicked her father out of the party, the founder of the party, to say, "Look, I'm not like those original people." So I think we've got something more like a Meloni party, or at least a Meloni leadership in France. But at the same time, the left coalition, and the fact that the left has been willing to, the centrist moderate left has been willing to enter into a partnership with some fairly dark forces. This is alarming too. And now in the second round, Macron and his, rump of centrists are endorsing this rather hard left, because they have no allies. They have nobody out there that sees the world in basically the same way they do. France is changing. Not a good picture.
It's interesting that it's been, 8 or 9 years now, and immigration just continues to be the issue driving political shocks in the West that drove Brexit, Trump's victory in 2016. It's propelling Le Pen in France. It's giving the German coalition huge problems. It may yet help put Trump back in the White House. Where do you see all this going?
Well, I think one of the things we can say is that if we look at the British example, letting the populace do what they want doesn't inexorably lead to greater and greater support for radical populist ideas. Brexit is now pretty unpopular in Britain. Corbyn's Labour group, radical left, has been driven out of power in the Labour Party. And Britain is actually having something like a competition between some fairly normal political parties. And so, this idea that somehow if one of these radical ideas gets in, the whole framework of life as we know it is going to be destroyed and there's no coming back. The British example points in a different direction, that sometimes, giving the people a chance to try something that they want to try, and then they find out it doesn't work as well as they hoped it would work. Well, that's, democracy is supposed to be an educational experience. We learn from experience, and maybe not so bad. So let's not catastrophize too badly. Let's not say that the entire future of civilization depends on the somewhat exhausted and often not particularly competent liberal center somehow clinging on to power by its fingernails no matter what. There may be some other options on the table.
All right, final story of the week. In a landmark ruling, Israel's High Court of Justice ruled unanimously that the government must draft ultra-Orthodox yeshiva students into the military, since there is no longer any legal framework to continue the decades-long practice of granting them blanket exemptions from army service. The court ruled that a government decision from 2023 instructing the army not to begin drafting eligible Haredi men, issued after the law allowing for blanket military service exemptions expired, was illegal, and that the government must therefore actively work to conscript ultra-Orthodox recruits to the IDF. This new reality has come about largely due to the confluence of two major events, according to the Times of Israel: the expiration of the original law allowing for blanket exemptions, and the October 7th Hamas attack and its aftermath, which threw into sharp relief the IDF's need for more manpower. Walter, news or faux news?
Well, first of all, if the Israeli Supreme Court was considering the need for more manpower in its legal decisions, it really needs to be thrown out of office immediately. That's a completely irresponsible basis to make a legal decision on. In fact, a more sensible ruling might have been, okay, well, the legal basis for this thing is expired, and you're going to either have to, find a new legal basis for continuing to do this thing, or you're going to have to change it. However, we are now in the middle of a war, and and for the duration of this national emergency, maybe we should be thinking about what comes next rather than demanding at this moment when the army. I mean, I don't want to point out anything that people haven't seen before. But, the Israeli army actually has a lot of things to think about right now beyond drafting and training Haredi soldiers in ways that will be complex and difficult and consume a lot of energy and, thought energy that maybe should be going to dealing with national security emergencies in Gaza, in the north, and the ongoing problems with Iran. Maybe. So to me, this is an example, and I think I have to say my guess would be that as before the war began, the Netanyahu government was trying to introduce reforms to the Supreme Court that the Supreme Court didn't like. And the issue of drafting Haredis is one of the issues that could split the Netanyahu coalition. Maybe there's a little bit of a political agenda here, a little axe being ground. I don't know. Maybe it's just all the law. But I think what we've seen is that the Israeli judicial system is dysfunctional, is in need of reform. I think it is correct that the total exemption from national service of all Haredi youth is something that might have been understandable when there weren't that many Haredi youth in Israel, but as time has gone by and the numbers have changed and the situation has changed, it's probably a good idea for Israel to rethink this. But that's, the military draft may be too crude of an instrument for that. There are lots of countries that provide different avenues for service for people with religious convictions. So, is this something Israel should be thinking about? Yes. Is it something that the status quo isn't really adequate to the reality? Yes. Was it a smart move of the Supreme Court to sort of weigh in at this particular moment? Unless your goal is to try to drive Netanyahu out of power, and that may be the agenda, I would say no.
All right, that does it for the news this week. Let's have the big conversation. So last week, Walter, we talked about the domestic implications of the infamous debate between President Biden and Donald Trump. This week, let's talk about the international repercussions. You wrote in a column this week that Biden's debate performance sent shockwaves through the international system and that it undermines confidence in both the durability of his administration and the competence of its leadership. Tell us what you think that might mean in geopolitical terms for the next 4 months between now and the election.
Well, the thing that struck me about the debate, obviously after the problems with the president's performance, was the degree to which former President Trump was hammering foreign policy as a kind of main line of attack on the Biden administration. Now, as a foreign policy columnist, I'm always happy when my poor, neglected subject somehow manages, get some attention paid to it during a national election. But Trump's arguments there, which he's been polishing up on various rallies. I went back and looked at some of the tapes of some rallies, and he's hitting this theme hard. He's saying that the incompetence / weakness / inability to inspire respect in American leadership is leading the world toward World War III. And he's looking at the increased sort of aggressive behavior by Russia, Iran and its proxies, North Korea and China, and saying this is a sign that that our adversaries perceive Biden as weak. And this weakness, unless it is dealt with, will lead to steadily escalating challenges and on to World War III. Now, that strikes me as, an argument that is strong, has enough evidence in its favor that it needs to be refuted. You don't refute it by looking like you are an extremely venerable elder who is not fully in, not fully in the moment, let's just say. And this, I think, means that we can expect, if there are more international crises between now and November, we know how President Trump will play them. And my guess is that if President Biden remains the Democratic nominee and doubts about his sort of ability to do the job are still very significant in the public mind, then those attacks are going to land very hard. They're going to have a significant effect. And when you tell people that a senescent president, if that's, that will certainly, that's the nicest way that Donald Trump would describe it. I'm not trying to diagnose the president. Maybe he just had an off day and he had a cold. I don't see him in these other times. But that is a powerful line of attack. I think President Trump will use it all he can. And if you listen to the crowds at some of these rallies, when Trump brings this line of attack up, people cheer. They resonate to these attacks. And then on the other side, of course, if our adversaries are convinced that the president is, only on between 10 and 4, as some of his defenders have suggested, well, that just means that 6 p.m. is a great time to start a big international crisis. Why don't you, if the administration is shaky, if presidential leadership is weak, well, maybe this is an excellent time. Maybe if you're China, you think, I'm going to push a little harder in the Philippines. If you're Iran, you think, well, maybe I'm going to give those Houthis a few more weapon systems, and I'm going to encourage Hezbollah to take a little bit of a harder line. And if you're Putin, maybe you think, I don't think these people have what it takes to stop me in Ukraine. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to double down. So you could get this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, vicious circle going, that perceptions of the president's lack of youthful vigor mean that our adversaries push harder, which means that foreign policy situation becomes more critical. There are more crises. That in turn increases the fear of people in the United States that the president isn't up to the job. And when obviously, again, Donald Trump will hit that note hard. Given that the president's staff has lost a lot of credibility, in other words, they'd been telling everybody for a couple of years, oh, he's fine, don't worry, all of those videos that show him looking slow or halting, that's all fake news, don't worry. Okay, now people say, well, we saw him ourselves and we don't believe you anymore. This will make it very hard for his staff to sort of defend the president. So I think foreign policy may play a larger role in the campaign than many thought. And unless things turn around, it may not play that helpful a role for the president.
Now that as a country we're kind of in this bind, and putting the election politics of it aside for a second, I mean, what options are there for the administration to try to kind of stop some of the bleeding here internationally? I mean, is there a role for the Secretary of State or the National Security Advisor, the Secretary of Defense, to take a more kind of visible leadership role to keep China and Russia and Iran at bay in the meantime, or is the die kind of already cast here?
Well, I think the same thing is needed internationally that's needed nationally. President Biden needs to go on a whirlwind tour showing that actually that debate performance was just not typical at all. It needs to be like Harry Truman, making whistle-stop tours and coming out and pressing the flesh and showing I'm active, I'm energetic, I'm on. Now, the fact that after the debate so far, at least as of the time that we're talking, Jeremy, the White House hasn't chosen to do that is obviously making many of us wonder why, because it is so much the obvious thing to do to counter that bad impression with a whole series of good ones. And it would have the impact on foreign leaders that would on domestic voters. It would say, no, the guy is in charge. Maybe he took too much NyQuil or something before the debate, but wow, this guy is sharp. This guy is formidable. and I need to think twice before I cross him. So that is the thing that he needs to do. Barring that, you can send out messages through surrogates. You can make sure that other countries know you have certain red lines, but but as long as there's this doubt about your staying power and your vitality, then I think you're going to face more challenges than you otherwise would.
All right, that does it for the big conversation. Let's end on the tip of the week. Another reader request, Walter, this time from Sean in Birmingham, who wants to know what's on your ideal July 4th barbecue plate. Are you a Carolina vinegar man, Carolina gold sauce, Kansas City, Memphis, Texas? What's your pick?
I don't even know how somebody could ask that question. There's so much scientific evidence that, about the health benefits of Carolina vinegar-based barbecue, about the sheer deliciousness of it. Pulled pork with Carolina vinegar barbecue. There really is nothing better. Now, I would say that a lot of people who think about barbecue have kind of a false idea in their head. They think that slaw is a good thing to serve with barbecue. When I think of slaw, I think of what Samuel Johnson used to say about cucumbers. He said a cucumber should be peeled, sliced, dressed with vinegar and salt, and then thrown out. And I think that last step in recipes for coleslaw would actually be good. So we don't need coleslaw on our plate. Hush puppies, yes. Corn on the cob, yes. Some really fresh garden-grown tomatoes, absolutely. So that's what a real 4th of July. That tells us that we're independent and the British are gone.
All right, there you have it. A very happy July 4th to all our listeners. Thanks to our producer, Noam Bloom. Thanks to Will Cummings at Hudson and my co-host, Walter Russell Mead. I'm Jeremy Stern. We'll see you next week. And until then, please go rate and review us. This helps other people find the show.